WNST, tasked before the draft, but it always builds and gets better anytime we have him on. And I found him because the Orioles are playing in Chicago against the White Sox. And although I know he likes a good baseball game and an adult beverage on the South Side from time to time, we're not going to talk about Manny Machado and the Orioles and the White Sox because he is one of our defending champions and my longtime friend from our days in Chicago at Sporting News. He now writes for Bleacher Report as well as The Athletic and The Score in Chicago. And he's working on a book with the reigning world champion head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, an all-time good dude, Doug Pederson. We welcome the man, the myth, the legend, Dan Pompei, back on from the windy city of Chicago, where we're going to see who sucks the worst on the South Side in the American League. But hey, the Bears have their own problems around there, and you got your hands full doing this book on the champions, right, Dano?
You know, before we talk about that, I've got to ask you if the Orioles are going to send Manny to the Cubs, because that's what everyone's talking about here in Chi-Town.
You know, I know that, and I keep wondering the same thing. I would think it would probably behoove the Angelos family to have a second bidder, which, really is the question here is, when's the better time to make the deal at July 31st? Would they get more now than later? Right now, it feels like there's one bidder, and it's the Cubs, and that's all Machado's going to hear about for a couple of days. A little different than our football landscape here in the offseason, where the question around here is, has Joe Flacco met Lamar Jackson yet? Which, we've been on that for a month. You got to admit, look, I was with my laptop on my lap. The Ozzie had traded down 16 to 22 to 25. They wind up picking this kid, tight end, and I'm like, I can nod off. I fell asleep for 20 minutes. My own text woke me up at 11:42, and suddenly the Ravens have a quarterback controversy. These are uncomfortable times for any organization with that going on, right, Dan?
Yeah, very, very interesting. I understand why it was done, though. I mean, Flacco obviously has been inconsistent and hasn't taken them where they need to go in recent years, and he's not getting any younger either. So, interesting dynamic, though, certainly with the way they chose to do it, and a player who, might not be ready to step in and replace Flacco in the short term, but might be able to still help them win games in the short term with a special package. And, I love the pick of Hayden Hurst. I spent a lot of time with Hayden in the off season and his family. I went down to their home in Jacksonville and did a big story on Bleacher Report, and I really believe he's a special young man. I think he's going to be a really good pro. He's got a lot going for him, and part of it is he's got the heart of a lion that I think really has benefited from all the experience he has in his life as a baseball player, and knows what it's like to fail and struggle and come to terms with something that is really kind of a mystery, and pour your heart into something else, pick yourself up off the ground, and really become something special. And I think the Ravens are really going to like this kid.
Tell me more about your time with him in that piece. And by the way, I'm sharing that right now out on our Twitter as well. You can find it at Bleacher Report. The headline is How Hayden Hurst Went from Baseball Flameout to Potential First-Round Draft Pick. Dan, it's amazing how many Ravens you touch, whether it was the Eric Weddle off-season story or Steve Smith or other things you've worked on. But it's kind of wild that you wrote about this kid, and he winds up being the apple of the Ravens' eye in 3 different trade backs. And the one thing I would say about Lamar Jackson, as much as he's overshadowed all this, if they were in love with Lamar Jackson, they would have taken him first.
Yeah, well, I think they probably were more set on getting a player who could help them now. I know there was talk about Calvin Ridley as well with that pick, or earlier with one of the earlier picks before the trade down. And I think they needed someone who could have a definite impact quickly on their offense. And Hayden Hurst and Ridley, they're both players who could help make the quarterback, whomever it is, better. So that's huge. But you asked me about Hayden. If you go back with him, and the one thing you're going to love about him, Nestor, is he's very open and honest. And a lot of people who've been through something like that will kind of try to put it in the back and not really deal with it. And, if you try to probe about it, they might shut you down or kind of try to change the subject. He owns what happened to him with the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball organization. When he started out as one of the hottest prospects in the country ended up with a case of the yips and couldn't throw the ball straight at all to save his life, and ended up having to give up his baseball dream. And it's one of those weird things where, it seemed like he thought that baseball was the right thing for him, and everyone kind of pushed him towards baseball because he had this incredible arm. He could throw, at one point 97 miles per hour, and that's kind of where his ticket was in terms of making money. So he gave up football in high school and concentrated solely on baseball. But I thought, baseball kind of became a business to him, whereas football was a passion, and it never stopped being a passion. It's where his heart was. And it's just kind of like the universe drove him to football, even though, the people in his life and the circumstances said you're a baseball player. So really unusual story. I don't know that we've ever seen a situation like this where we've got a first-round pick coming after failing in another sport after being such a highly regarded prospect.
Well, and maybe his age was used against him to some degree, right? That he's all he's going to be at this point, that they don't feel the upside. Other teams felt that way about him, but certainly had the best hands in the draft and was well thought of as a receiving option, much more so than obviously Calvin Ridley, who the Ravens passed on, and real wide receivers, right?
Yeah, and the thing about his age is interesting. I mean, I know, it was talked about a lot. Certainly, it's something that could be held against him because he's not as young as the other prospects. But on the other hand, I think you're looking at a guy who is mature from a life experience standpoint, and more what you're going to get. A lot of times these young kids, 20 years old, are unpredictable because they're still kids and they're not really mature and they're still developing mentally and emotionally. I think this kid is beyond a lot of that, and he's he's a man, and he's the man that I think he was supposed to be at this point in his life, and there's something to be said for that. He also doesn't have a lot of football wear and tear on him. Like, there are kids coming out who are, again, 20 years old who've been physically much more beat up than him. Well, he wasn't playing football like they were for all those years. The flip side is, maybe he's a little raw. Maybe he's a little green because he doesn't have that experience. He's only been playing the tight end position for a couple of years. So he's got a lot to learn. I think he's got a lot of potential, too, to develop as he continues to master the position.
Dan Pompei is our guest. You can find him at Bleacher Report, The Athletic, The Score, anywhere football players usually are. You can find him at Dan Pompei on Twitter. And he's been my friend since our weekly visits at Sporting News back on Nasty Nationwide 20 years ago now, Pompei. And all of these 20 years, the same guys have been picking Ravens players. And you mentioned young and raw and all of that stuff. That is the story of Lamar Jackson, and I've said loudly and clearly he was the fifth best quarterback in the draft, or the fifth quarterback taken. The Ravens passed on him 3 times in the first round before they dealt back to get him, and they've got a quarterback that, you've pointed out, isn't getting any younger, but somehow we don't feel that way about Tom Brady at 41 in his TB12 plan, do we? I think Flacco thinks he's got a lot of football left in him, but this is an interesting transitional phase for him, and whether this kid's going to be able to play, and the whole Wildcat and 2 different kinds of offenses, and Marty Morningwig going into a nutty professor role here and trying to dream up slash roles for a kid who, quite frankly, made it very clear he didn't want to touch the ball as anything other than a quarterback. And Flacco has made it pretty clear that he doesn't want to run a Wildcat and run out and line up wide as a $25 million quarterback in the league. So somewhere in this, as Ozzie Newsome fades and Eric DeCosta comes on, we have an interesting year, I think, in the Ravens' kingdom in a lot of different ways, including whether the fans are going to come back or not.
Yeah, no question. I think it's an important year, too. Obviously, Ozzie is trying to leave his mark on this team for the long term. This was his last draft, and he wants to make it a great one. And, well, what a legacy he leaves after all the time in Baltimore, going back to his days in Cleveland. I mean, you talk about a unique man and a great general manager and a person who's had just a tremendous impact on the NFL in so many ways. I know he's thought of so highly in the Ravens organization and town there, and always will be. And it would be a great tribute to him to see some of these draft picks come on and really leave a mark like some of his other draft picks have over time. But I think, the quarterback thing is going to be real interesting. I almost wonder if this might not be a trend where, you have a traditional quarterback like Joe Flacco, and then you have another quarterback who could be a package guy like Lamar Jackson, who could come in and benefit you in certain circumstances. It's like you see teams go no huddle at a certain point in the game, or 2-minute drill, or whatever they do that they change things up. It could be a interesting way to attack defenses and keep them on their heels, and also provide them with something more to prepare for than the usual offensive game plan. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what Marty Mornhinweg cooks up with this. Obviously, he's worked with Michael Vick before, who many compared Jackson to. So he's got some ideas in his head. But I think the other thing is the way offense has evolved since Michael Vick played. It's really changed with the RPOs now and the different things that people are doing in Kansas City and Philadelphia and all over the place with the Chip Kelly influence. And I think Baltimore is probably ready for some of that.
He is Dan Pompei. You can read his work anywhere the internet is served out at Dan Pompei, as well as at The Athletic and Bleacher Report, and now working on a new novel with Doug Pederson. How long have you known Doug? I mean, one of the renowned good guys in the game, and I think part of the knock on him was he might have been too nice a guy to be a head coach, quite frankly. And having spent time in that building and having seen Jeff Lurie, and now they've won this championship with my buddy Jimmy Schwartz running the defense there as well. Maybe the right guy at the right time for all of that. I mean, you mentioned Chip Kelly and emotional intelligence was not long on that. Certainly Doug Pederson brought that in and won a championship with a backup quarterback. I mean, it's just look, if it weren't the Eagles fans that I had to be involved in, I'd feel really good about the Eagles winning.
Well, what's interesting, I think, is that a lot of people misjudge Doug Pederson because he's not the typical personality in terms of a football coach. He's kind of atypical in a lot of ways, and I think really that's exactly why he has been so successful, why he resonated with his team, and why he got that team to do things that very few coaches, I think, could have gotten them to do. I mean, he played such a role in their success, more so, I think, than most coaches play. You look at what they overcame. I mean, they lost Carson Wentz, who could have been an MVP if he had stayed healthy, and then they lost their starting left tackle, who was a Pro Bowler, Jason Peters. They lost Jordan Hicks, middle linebacker. They lost Chris Maragos, the best special teams player. They lost their kicker on the first week of the season, and they just kept rolling. And I think a lot of it was because of the way Pederson connected with his team and resonated, the words that he said, the messaging. It was pretty unusual, and I think he got that team to believe in the concept of ownership, and all of those players felt they owned that team, and ultimately they did. They owned it all the way to a Super Bowl championship, and it was pretty special. He's a pretty special coach, and I'm going to be surprised if he doesn't have more success in his future.
What's the book? Is the book his story, or is the book the story of the team?
It's his story. The name of the book is called Fearless. And the book is by Doug Pederson with Dan Pompei, and it's a memoir of not only about the Eagles, it's about his whole life and his previous experience. He tells some great Brett Favre stories. He talks about playing with Dan Marino. He talks about Mike Holmgren, being coached by Mike Holmgren and Don Shula, and his experience with Andy Reid, and even earlier in his life too. But a lot of the book, we get pretty deep into the Eagles and the season and the characters and coaching Carson, coaching Nick Foles, all the different challenges that he faced during the season. It struck me too how so many times we get used to coach speak and guys who are very guarded with their words and their thoughts, and Doug was very open and honest and reflective about everything that happened. And, he's not the kind of guy who will ever say, he put it this way, he's not afraid to say I was wrong, or he's not afraid to look at his shortcomings, or he's not afraid to say, I needed to do better at this. And very refreshing in that regard. I think people are going to like reading this book, especially. I know Eagles fans are going to like it because it's got a lot of really good information about their team in it.
Tell him I think it was really nice of him to let Carson go over and marry that girl last weekend in London. You give him the weekend off the way he did. So, hey, man, take care of yourself. So when's the book come out?
The book comes out August 28th.
Okay, so just in time for kickoff for the Eagles to defend their Super Bowl title, which we all know is a pretty difficult thing to do. Hey, man, stay cool there in Chicago. Hit the beach this summer a little bit. I'll be looking forward to that Doug Pederson book in Fearless as it comes out in late August, and I appreciate how busy you are in writing a book in the offseason and making some time for us. Always a pleasure, Dan.
Good to talk with you, Nestor. Take
Dan
care.
Pompei, my dear friend, and a survivor as well, out there at the Bleacher Report, as well as The Athletic and The Score, and on Twitter. He's one of the great followers in the NFL, and if you've never read his Eric Weddle piece, go do that. If you haven't read the Hayden Hurst piece, I shared that on our Twitter as well. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear, no static at all, just like our friends at the Model Lyric hosting Steely Dan on October the 11th for my 50th birthday. We got a whole bunch of stuff coming up. Our 20th anniversary here is in August. We're running the trip that weekend out to see Ray Lewis in Canton, Ohio for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Also seeing the Indians and the Pirates in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Trying to put together a Belmont bus for June 9th to see Justify and see if Bob Baffert can win him a Triple Crown up there in New York. So we'll be doing that in the coming weeks here as well, as our trips to Nashville for my 50th birthday and Charlotte, all under the Road Trips tab at WNST.net. Our morning newspaper delivers to your email inbox free of charge each and every morning. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, guaranteed. Also, the Maryland Jockey Club presents the Pimlico entries for this weekend. Done with the mud out there, drying it out, and getting ready to race, and they'll get back to Laurel a little later on in the spring as spring turns to summer. Those entries in our morning newspaper and at the front of WNST.net. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I am a very available individual. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNS TV channel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.